Let's jump into it. There is a photograph developed from a camera that melted. The man who took it did not survive to see it. The camera did. Somewhere, right now, there is a drawer in a museum most people will never visit, holding an object that has outlived everyone who touched it, everyone who loved it, everyone who was supposed to remember it. And the strange thing is, it's still trying to tell us something. Today, we're going to look at the object's history left behind, not the ones in textbooks, the ones that shouldn't have made it, the ones that make historians go quiet. Because when a person disappears, they take almost everything with them almost. Number 6. The illusion of disappearance. We like to believe that death is total, that when something ends, it ends completely. No residue, no trace, just silence. That belief is comforting, it is also wrong. Human beings are shockingly good at leaving fingerprints on time, not metaphorical ones, literal ones, pressed into clay, burned into film, frozen into ice, fused into glass, and every so often, one of those fingerprints survives long enough for us to find it. When that happens, something uncomfortable occurs. The object stops being an artifact, it becomes a witness, and witnesses don't just show us the past, they accuse us of forgetting it. Number 5. The Iceman's Last Meal. In 1991, 2 hikers in the Alps found what they thought was a lost mountaineer, frozen, curled, preserved almost perfectly in the ice. He wasn't a mountaineer, he was over 5,000 years old. They called him Otzi. And at first, this felt like a simple archaeological win, the oldest naturally preserved human ever found. A time capsule of Copper Age life. But then something strange happened. Scientists opened his stomach. Inside, they found his last meal undigested. Fat, grains, meat. A man who had eaten well, recently, calmly. Not the meal of someone starving, not the meal of someone fleeing, which made his death even harder to explain. Because an arrowhead was lodged in his shoulder, a wound that should have killed slowly, painfully, over hours, and near his body signs of a struggle. Blood from at least 2 other people, not his own. This wasn't an accident. This was the oldest cold case on Earth. A man who ate a full meal, was hunted, wounded, possibly betrayed by someone he trusted, and then froze in place for over 5,000 years, waiting for someone to ask the question he never got to answer. Who did this to me? We still don't know. And that's the part almost nobody talks about. Otzi isn't just an artifact. He's an unsolved murder that outlived every possible suspect, every possible witness, every possible motive. Justice became mathematically impossible the moment the ice closed over him. And yet here we are, still looking, still asking, why do we care so much about a stranger's death from 5 millennia ago? Hold that question, we'll come back to it. Number 4. The Shadows That Won't Leave. Hiroshima, August 1945. At 8:15 in the morning, in less than 1 second, an entire section of a city was erased in light. Most of what disappeared completely. Bodies, buildings, names, but not all of it. On the stone steps of a bank, near where a person had been sitting, something impossible happened. The surface around them bleached under the heat of the blast, but the exact spot where the person sat stayed dark. A shadow, permanent, burned into stone by the absence of a human body that blocked the light for one final instant. The person was gone, the shadow stayed. This is where everything changes, psychologically, because we are no longer looking at an artifact in the traditional sense. We are looking at the last physical proof that someone existed at all. No name, no face, no grave, just an outline where a life used to be. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Those shadows are still there today. Decades later, people visit them, photograph them, stand exactly where that person once sat, in the exact spot the light couldn't reach. We don't preserve these shadows because they're beautiful. We preserve them because deep down, we understand something about ourselves. We are all, eventually, going to become an absence someone else stands next to. Number 4. The Voice That Refused to Stop. In 1997, deep-sea explorers reached the wreck of the Titanic for the second time. Everyone expected rust decay, silence. What they didn't expect was sound. Not literal sound, but something close to it. Among the debris, they recovered personal items untouched by 90 years of ocean pressure. A wallet, letters, and in one case a piece of sheet music, still legible, belonging to a musician who was known to have kept playing as the ship sank. Historians already knew the band played until the end. That part isn't new. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is what the recovered artifacts revealed when cross-referenced with survivor testimony. Several of the unimportant personal items, hairbrushes, spectacles, a child's shoe, were logged, catalogued, and stored for decades in near-total anonymity. Nobody claimed them, nobody could, because the people who owned them were never identified. which means somewhere, in the cold Atlantic, there are still people the ocean refuses to name. Objects with no story attached, voices with no mouths left to speak them. This is where the fascination turns into something heavier. Because we don't actually fear death, we fear disappearing without anyone knowing we were ever here. And these objects, the shoe, the brush, the letter, they are proof that disappearing completely is possible. Even when something survives, even when something is found. Number 3. The object that survived a genocide of memory. In a house in Amsterdam, a teenage girl wrote in a notebook almost every day for 2 years. She wrote about boredom, crushes, arguments with her mother, ordinary teenage things. She had no idea her diary would become one of the most read books in human history. She had no idea she would not survive. Anne Frank died in a concentration camp weeks before liberation. Weeks. Not years. Weeks. But her diary did survive, rescued from the floor of the hiding place, after her family was arrested, kept safe by someone who never even read it until much later, because she couldn't bear to. And here's the part that quietly destroys people once they understand it. The diary almost wasn't published at all. It was nearly discarded, nearly lost in the chaos of post-war Europe, just paper in a drawer, indistinguishable from 1,000 other forgotten notebooks. The only reason you know her name is a sequence of near misses, so fragile it borders on impossible, which raises an uncomfortable question. How many other Anne Franks were there? How many diaries were thrown away, burned, left in houses that were bulldozed? How many voices came this close to being heard and weren't? We don't memorialize Anne Frank because her story is rare. We memorialize her because her survival is rare. Millions had the diary. Millions had the words. Millions had a version of her thoughts written down somewhere. Almost none of them survived to be read. Number 2. The thing that still kills. Not everything that survives is innocent. In the basement of the ruined Chernobyl reactor, there's a mass of solidified nuclear material, nicknamed the elephant's foot. Formed in the days after the 1986 disaster, it's a fused mixture of sand, concrete, and reactor fuel, dense and black, and still radioactive enough that, for years after the meltdown, standing near it for a few minutes could be fatal. It doesn't look dangerous. It looks like a rock, almost geological, almost natural, but it is, quite literally, one of the most dangerous man-made objects on the planet, and it will remain that way for decades still to come. This is where the story stops being about memory and starts being about consequence, because the elephant's foot isn't a monument. It's a wound that hasn't finished healing. Every object we've talked about so far preserves a moment. This one preserves a mistake, and it will keep radiating that mistake into the future, long after everyone who caused it, everyone who died from it, everyone who remembers it firsthand, is gone. Some things survive to remind us who we were. This one survives to remind us what we're capable of doing wrong. Here's what none of these stories are actually about. They're not about ancient mummies. They're not about shipwrecks or diaries or reactors. They're about us. Every single one of these objects exists because someone, somewhere, unknowingly left proof of their existence in a place time couldn't quite erase. That is terrifying, because it means survival isn't determined by importance. It isn't determined by fame, or wealth, or moral worth. Otzi wasn't a king. He was likely an ordinary man in the wrong place at the wrong moment. The person in the Hiroshima shadow wasn't chosen for remembrance. They simply happened to be sitting on stone instead of wood. Anne Frank was one voice among millions who wrote, and hoped, and disappeared, except her notebook happened to survive a war that killed almost everything else it touched. Survival, historically speaking, has almost nothing to do with significance. It has everything to do with chance. And that should disturb you a little, because it means the version of you that gets remembered, if any version does, will likely be decided by an accident. A photograph someone happened to take. A message someone happened to save. An object that happened to be in the one place, fire, or water, or time, couldn't reach. We spend our whole lives trying to control how we'll be remembered. History says we don't get to.